Gombrich had the kind of standard type of Popperian idea that learning from your mistakes is kind of the most important thing for any intellectual endeavor. And he thought that aesthetics generally did not have this ability. You could not learn from your mistakes in aesthetics. Gombrich is kind of the Popperian guy in regards to art. He was really deep into Popper. He was actually close friends with Popper. And he applied Popper's sociology to the history of art, and he applied Popper's epistemology to the psychology of representation, essentially how we use techniques to create things that are recognizable in works of art. And I really like Gombrich's ideas. They're very nice, very cool stuff. But he had a thing against values in art. He didn't want to ever discuss values in art. So I want to talk a little bit about why he thought that aesthetics were not a good idea, why you could not talk about values in art. It's going to be important to know what we mean by values in art. So let's just say the word aesthetics, sometimes it means a lot of different things, right? A lot of people think it just means the study of art. Sometimes it just means the study of beauty. Sometimes it means a design philosophy or a design language, like the dark academia aesthetic. It's like a genre almost. Sometimes it just means cool. It's like a positive evaluation. That was aesthetic, or this is aesthetic. But with Gombrich, what he really meant when he was against aesthetics, theories of aesthetics, he meant specifically against the idea of discussing rules in art, and also against any sort of methodology or any rules for determining the values in art. I'm going to have a couple videos related to this topic, and in the future, it's going to be a little bit more clear that I have not read a lot of Gombrich directly. I'm mostly getting this from a secondary source, another friend of Gombrich, but it'll become obvious a little bit later down the road how accurately this person has conveyed Gombrich's position, and it'll only become obvious later down the road when I read Gombrich, because I haven't read much of his works. But most of what I'm getting comes from this book called Aesthetic Criteria. It's from Sheldon Richman, and he wrote about Gombrich's attack on aesthetics. He puts a lot of direct quotes in there and lots of references. So I've read some of the references, but out of context. I've not read the books that Gombrich has written himself. So Gombrich has 3 reasons against aesthetics, 3 things he doesn't like about aesthetics, 3 cases against it. The main thing, the connective tissue here, is that he thinks you cannot learn from your mistakes. When you have an aesthetic theory, if you have a theory for rules for appreciating works of art, or if you have any methodology for discussing works of art, any particular way to discuss the values in a work of art, you cannot learn from your mistakes with those 2 things. And since you can't learn from your mistakes, it is not intellectually worthwhile. And he shows in 3 ways why you can't learn from your mistakes. The first is a historical way. There are reasons in history to show that there's no way to learn from your mistakes. Essentially, that every single person in the past who has had criteria for evaluating a work of art has misvalued some works of art, which will mean that you always come to error if you have a system for evaluating a work of art. What's worse about that is that anytime that you want to correct your error, the only way to do that is to just abandon all of your criteria, go outside of it, evaluate the work on its own terms, and then try to bring back something from there and change your criteria, right? And he thinks all of that process is just too much. It's superfluous. It would just make sense to not have any standards and only evaluate works of art on their own standing, on their own standards, without reference to anything else. That's what we're going to be calling the historical argument against aesthetics. Every theory of aesthetics has made mistakes, and the only way to correct those mistakes is to ignore the theory of aesthetics. After the historical argument, the next one is the psychological argument. He thinks that Psychologically speaking, it is impossible to have a method for appreciating works of art for a very, very simple reason. To appreciate a work of art, it depends on background knowledge, cultural knowledge, personal tastes, that type of thing. If you want to appreciate a work of art, you have to have the right tastes for certain works of art. If you want to appreciate a work of art, you have to have certain background knowledge. You have to have certain cultural context. You have to just know these things in the background. Since all of that stuff is so variable and uncontrollable, you can't have any rules for it. There's no way to control the background knowledge. If you have personal tastes or if you just have some sort of cultural knowledge, you can't systematically control that. It just kind of happens. It's based on where you grow up. It's based on weird personal experiences that you may have had as a kid. All of those things are shaping your tastes. They're shaping your background experiences. And those all change how you appreciate a work of art, or if you can even appreciate a work of art. Since that can't be controlled, you can't have rules. And when I say this specifically, you can't have rules, that just means that there's going to be some weird art that I like, right? I mean, even specifically, art that I've made. There's going to be art that I've made that I like, and no one else is going to be able to like it because they can't have my personal experiences that make it so that I like that work of art. And since I can't help somebody, like I can't guide somebody else into liking my work of art or appreciating my work of art, that means that there can't be rules. Right? That's just an extreme example, but then that follows for every single work of art. There can be no way for me to reconfigure somebody else's tastes or experiences to be able to appreciate a work of art. So any method for appreciating work of art is psychologically impossible. And finally, we have a logical argument against aesthetics. The logical argument has more to do with language. It's just that most linguistic terms used in aesthetics do not actually refer to any particular judgments. All right, so common in the day of people who are academics talking about aesthetics, they might use terms like harmony or unity and things like that. This is kind of the stuff that academics and critics will talk about, the harmony of a work of art. But it isn't very clear if a harmonious work of art is immediately a good work of art, or if a clear work of art is immediately a good work of art, and so on. You get the picture there. So because of that, it just means that none of the words that we use to make the point that something is good refer to anything that is good. Whenever I talk about a beautiful work of art, if I ever talk about a beautiful work of art, I'm just going to be saying things about the work of art or saying things about my own interpretation about the work of art, but I'm never going to be saying anything that is good or bad. None of the words that I'm using are going to refer to that type of judgment. And so since none of the words that are being used actually refer to the judgments that we want them to refer to, all of those words are unnecessary, useless, superfluous. The more strict logical sense is that the aesthetic terms do not discriminate aesthetic qualities. The aesthetic quality will be how good or bad a work of art is, and none of the aesthetic terms that we use, harmonious, unity, clear, aesthetic terms like that, none of those actually discriminate between goodness or badness in a work of art or values a work of art at all. So because of that, all of the language that we use is logically inadequate. And so every theory of aesthetics is logically impossible. So those are all the reasons why Gombrich would not like any aesthetic theories. He would not like my channel. I'm just making that up. I don't actually know. Maybe he would love my channel. These are some reasons to dismiss all of the things that I talk about in this channel. Any endeavor to refer to the beauty of a work of art or try to evaluate the beauty of a work of art, all of that is out of the window from Gombrich's perspective. I'm sure I'll go into more detail with some of these things in future videos. I'm actually recording a video that's going to be much more thorough about the psychological argument against aesthetics from Gombrich and then giving some alternatives to his idea, uh, refuting his idea. Those will all come later, but for now, we're just going to say reject it. We've rejected aesthetics. Gombrich has just invalidated my entire life. What do you think of that? I mean, does it make sense to you? I particularly like the psychological argument against it. I don't really like the historical. I don't really like the logical, but I like the psychological one. In isolation and together, they're all pretty good arguments. I don't think they hold up to a lot of scrutiny, but they're good enough. Can you think of any ways to refute his arguments? It's kind of tough because you gotta refute all three of these babies to get anywhere. But do you think there's any ways that we can set up some type of methodology for evaluating a work of art, determining if it is beautiful or not, or good or not?